Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you have been enjoying your day so far. In this session, we're going to be talking about how can technology be used to support oh, that's actually the wrong session, so don't listen to me on that one. How organizations are using people analytics to navigate uncertainty. I was way too far down my agenda on that one. So to discuss this, I'm joined by Beatriz Rodriguez, Vice President of HR, Human Capital and Technology at Baker Hughes, Jan Krögel, Vice President of Employee Experience and People Analytics at Capgemini, Melissa Cantor, Vice President of People Analytics and Insights at Lego, Nikki Clement, Vice President of Organization and People Analytics at Unilever, and David Sobit, who's the Vice President and Chief HR Officer of Europe for PepsiCo. Welcome, everyone. How are you all?
Very well, thank you.
Very well.
I love that moment because no one knows when to speak first. Like my favorite thing is, I don't know, have any of you found any solutions for that during a call of how you kind of welcome everyone, or is it just me?
Lots of use of chat, I think. It's become the next most popular sidebar posse. Yeah,
actually, that's a good suggestion to do in the chat. Before we jump in, thank you all for joining us. I'm super excited about this session. Couldn't think of a better group of leaders to bring together on this. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to pick on Jan first, which he didn't know about, but now he knows. So Jan, in this critical time, obviously we need to understand our people and what we can do to help them further. So I'd love to hear from everyone. We'll start with Jan of how you're using people analytics to give the business the insights that it needs during these times.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for that. I think it's we started off the journey of analytics more from that end, from listening to our people, because we started from a business challenge about 3 years ago in Capgemini, where we saw that we have more and more shifting expectations of our young crowd. Our average age is 33 years. We've got close to half of our population being younger than 30 years. So there's a lot of tech savvy and expectation changing people in there, and we didn't have a way to understand basically where these expectations were going. So about 3 years ago, we launched really a continuous employee listening approach that we called Pulse, because that's what we wanted to put, a more continuous way of getting that feedback from our teams. And we had one objective, which was around creating a common language so that every leader and everybody in the organization could understand what we mean with this, what's employee engagement, and what kind of things we measure. And then second, we also wanted to empower the organization. And I think that was the key part and the key benefit we got from using the platform we selected, which is, by the way, Peakon, and which we are really happy with, which basically gives access in a very nice user experience-like way to more than now 9,000 managers to get directly the results to them nearly real time and allow them to engage with their people. And I think it was really important to shift that. The understanding of for the group obviously is a key one at the top for the whole of the group. The other really key expectation was to empower the manager in the shortest amount of time and get that insight to them. And I think that was one of the big insights, is that we could actually see, especially for the COVID crisis when it came, we already had that infrastructure in place. And what we saw was a real big change in no time of the engagement scores, the comments that came in. And all this was basically something that managers could immediately react to and kind of make sense of. So there was, I think, less of a panic or less of a feel of, no, we don't know where we're going, thanks to this infrastructure. And so I think coming back to the question of the uncertainty, I think that's where we were kind of equipped to deal with that uncertainty of COVID. And we also launched some additional questions, like many did as well. But what was interesting was really to compare before, during, and now kind of going into a new wave of what's happening afterwards. And we used this to also now understand yet again how the expectations have shifted. And we saw some incredible scores going through the roof. Incredible. I mean, in 3 months, no time. And I know that other companies have gone through the same journey. And this actually, for me, definitely tells me that there is a change in expectations due to this crisis. And now we have done some NLP on this, and we are on that journey. We are kind of starting this, I would say. And one of the big things we see going forward, and what also came to us in this crisis, was to understand better where are the people connecting, and how can we use, for example, the organization, network analysis that we don't do today, but we would love to go into this, to better understand how the teams in these times connected, because we saw changes in how people interact with each other, and we saw that reflected in our pulse. but we would love to understand a bit more structurally speaking how this really happened and where this is going.
Amazing. Feel free to jump in, everyone. Don't wait for me.
Yeah, I think likewise, we also started and looking at it from an engagement perspective and trying to see, how are employees doing navigating these times and what support can we give them? And likewise, we did additional surveys and looked at the results and use that to help guide our decisions. More operationally, we did a lot of reporting of just understanding the health of our employees and who's struggling and who's not, and doing all the regulatory reporting that comes with managing COVID and those sorts of things. And interestingly enough, we also looked at it from a mobility perspective as well. Obviously, our people aren't moving around the world as much as they used to. And what does that mean for our longer term workforce planning and making sure that our workforce plans and our staffing are still the way they need to be to deliver on our business agenda? I think, it's been a really interesting year. I think we'll all agree it's been a bit crazy. We've been doing all sorts of things on the agenda that we never planned to do and learning a lot as we go through it.
And I
I agree. And Melissa and I
this has been also an opportunity to. Sorry, go ahead, Nikki.
No, David, I was just going to connect because Melissa and I talk a lot about workforce planning together. So sorry, I was just thinking that was a useful moment to lead on. Because actually so much has changed with workforce planning, as Melissa's already said. And I think we've seen much lower attrition rates now. I think people are looking for certainty in times of uncertainty. So we're actually seeing resignation rates drop. And that has workforce planning implications, making sure that we're making sensible business decisions. And I think what we've all seen is more need for data-driven decision making, because actually our leaders are having to make really timely decisions. So they need that data, timely, transparent, and ethical. And we need to make sure we're meeting their needs as quickly as we can, as promptly, with the right transparency as we can, but also making sure that it is truly ethical, because, Melissa touched as well on our COVID case rates. We certainly weren't bringing that level of occupational health data at a senior Unilever level ever before. So we're really trying to pivot very quickly, but making sure we're still protecting sensitive data, aggregating data so it is shareable. So that elevation is happening and we're connecting the data sets. So we talk a lot less now about HR data. We talk a lot more about employee and worker data, because actually it connects equally importantly with our financials, our supply chain data, and actually helps bring all of those together so our leaders can make decisions in a timely fashion. Sorry, David.
No, what I was just about to say is that during this time, I think one of the things we discover is that due to the uncertainty, and nobody really faced a situation like that before, we face a lot of emotion. People were not necessarily very clear what is the right decision to take, what are we supposed to do. So whether it comes from an engagement perspective, in PepsiCo we're having now discussion about what the future of offices, how we're going to redesign potentially the purpose of an office in the future. What do people want? They've been working from home from a long period of time, and all that trigger a lot of emotion, because everybody, is also going through the crisis through their own lenses. So I think the beauty of having an analytic team is that they help you to bring a certain number of data points and rationality into a discussion that per nature is going to be very emotional, including for the leader of the organization. And I think that's where we've seen that having a team like that brought a real difference in the organization.
I think, Chris, from my side, when I look at where can we help leaders, we really can help them to see the invisible of talent management, for example, right? So those are those insights that are not that visible, that today the remoteness of our world has really taken us to a different level of understanding. That is all data that we actually can use and provide leaders to actually identify the behaviors and how employees are collaborating across the globe without really being necessarily face to face, and that's one of the challenges as well.
Mm-hmm. What about speed? Because obviously right now we've mentioned we're having been told asked to do things that we haven't been asked to do before at scale, at speed. Nikki, how are you using people analytics to help the business move at speed quickly as we continue to pivot?
I think what we're helping people do is understand our employees much more quickly. So we're using different technology. So I was a little bit ready to pivot myself as you were starting to introduce the session slightly differently about, oh gosh, right, we can start talking about technology. But actually, we've been able to use tools like Workplace Analytics as part of the Microsoft suite. We've been using Qualtrics in terms of our employee insight tools, and actually bringing data sets together to very quickly understand from an always-on point of view, how are our users using new technology? How are they accessing our systems from home? We've got this really interesting challenge now where anybody who's joined in the last 6 months probably hasn't seen their colleagues face to face if they've been joining from our offices. So obviously, from the organization, there's a lot of our essential workers, our frontline workers in our supply chain who are continuing to do a really important job for us. But for the office-based teams, yet they probably haven't met their team. They've only ever joined through technology. And how does that feel for them? So, understanding the sentiment of the groups with very short service, we're really pleased to see actually they're feeling incredibly positive about the organization. So spotting very quickly whether people feel supported by their line manager, whether they've got access to the tech they need, how the workload's feeling, their work-life balance. I think as David was already saying, as Jan's saying, we're adding new questions, we're understanding more, but what we're doing is feeding that information through so we understand if things are changing week by week. So we're not waiting. Day by day, we know our factory COVID cases. Week by week, we know our sentiment. Using the natural language processing sentiment analysis, how are our people feeling? So we know if there's any hotspots or problems anywhere, so we can actually make a move to step in and support.
Yeah, and if I can just build on that one, Nikki, and also what David, you said, I think that's where we're also looking into what's happening afterwards, right? So what's the design of the new?
By the way, Jan, you don't need to hold the mic there. You can leave the mic down. You don't have to hold it.
Okay, so I'm not doing the noise that you told me.
You sound perfect.
Okay, good.
You sound perfect.
No, I was just saying, because I think we're all in this kind of stage, and I think the new normal, or whatever we'll call it, what happens afterwards, it's not what we live through now. And we can see in these numbers and it's statistics, right? It's an incredible amount of feedback we get from our people. We feel that they have reached a kind of a comfort zone now. They can work, they're productive, the panic is gone. And now obviously they're happier than before if we believe our numbers. And I know we're not the only ones. But I think the reality now becomes also to not design the wrong thing for the future. As also David said, as we don't know the future, we need to make sure we design the right future, and to be able to track the feedback on this new feature is also avoiding that suddenly engagement drops. Because if I just take an example, we have in many countries 100% work from home due to constraints of these people, for our people. If tomorrow we say you have to come back 2 or 3 days a week to the office because there could be one design element, what is the impact on engagement? What's the impact on the work-life balance, and everything that maybe they have thought is acquired now and they were comfortable with, but tomorrow it might actually deceive them with whatever we do. So I think the data, coming back to your question on speed and continuity, is we cannot measure anymore every year. We need to having constantly an idea how what we do is really impacting now. And we also then, and I think that's the tricky part, where we put a lot of effort in, what are the actions we can actually drive and react? Because we also, as an organization, then need to react. And I think it brings it back to the role of People Analytics. Where is People Analytics positioned in the organization will be important, because they will need to help the leaders to drive it at the right level, to do things quickly and to get decisions done quickly. I think that's a critical element. I mean, listening is great. Without action, it's not really adding that much value.
I think to build on your question about speedy responses, one of the things we spent a lot of time with, and I think we all probably have done this, is in all the countries we operate in, the government regulations and guidance changes constantly, and we have to react to it straight away, and then we have to advise our employees straight away. And for example, in our London office, what does that mean when we have to implement social distancing? What does that mean for non-employees that we should allow into the office if they choose to do so? Do we still suggest, or do we indeed mandate employees work from home? And these things shift all the time globally. So keeping on track of that all the time globally and being able to give recommendations in terms of, from a people analytics perspective, what that means for capacity in offices has been something we've been looking into, which has been really interesting. And what's also interesting is just watching the organization put in the processes and mechanics that are needed, from listening to Boris Johnson make an announcement at 7 p.m. to operationalizing what that means for us and communicating out. So by the time offices get to work the next day and open up, it's really, I'm quite proud of how quickly, and I don't think it's just Lego, I think all companies are responding super quickly to that guidance.
Mm-hmm. And it's something we don't even see happening behind the scenes, right? It's expected to happen, but every different country, every region, it's just changing constantly as well. I'm wondering from yourself, David, how, as a CHRO, you are quantifying the business ROI of people analytics. Is the investment increased over the past few months? As you know, that obviously you can get the insights from technology and analytics, but it can be expensive. So I wonder how you look at it from a CHRO perspective.
Yeah, well, there is, I think there is two elements I would separate. There is the technology per se. And I think, by the way, we need to be careful, because very often in people analytics, I see that sometimes we fall in love with technology and systems and tools at the expense of what we're trying to achieve. I had a couple of conversations with my team where, they show you very nice charts and it's shiny and it's fantastic. Okay, so what am I going to do with that? Very concretely, what would I take any fundamental different decision based on this insight? So I think it's very important to separate the tool and the methodology, which is just a vehicle to get to what you need, from actually the real insight you need. And I think that's why, for me, it's very important that you embed completely people analytics into your talent processes and your people processes. So, for example, we have a tool that helps us to predict, which employee potentially is going to leave. So, employee turnover. You can take that completely in isolation. You can have a very sophisticated tool. What is more interesting is, of course, to identify those people, but also to understand how this turnover will potentially affect your organic revenue growth, your sales, and that will allow leader then to take the right decision. And I think that's very often this connection, which is very important. So the way we've done that in PepsiCo is precisely embedding all those technology or tools or methods into our normal talent processes. And then it becomes a data point that is going to inform you, and with a clear outcome and a clear impact, rather than having that in isolation.
What advice would you give to other people listening of some practical steps of how they do that? Because it's not easy.
Well, you start with, for me, the way we tackled that, we started with, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What we're trying to achieve is to develop and build the right capabilities for the organization. Okay, so how do we do that? What are the information we're going to need? Well, I need to understand what is the strategy of the business and what capability we're trying to build. And I need to understand, the quality of the people I currently have. I need probably also to have a bit of insight about the external market. So if you design step by step those kind of things, then it's easy to plug. Okay, that technology method, people analytics will help me to gather a certain number of data that is going to be very difficult to have manually, or it's going to be impression and emotional discussion with no concrete outcome and no concrete basis. Once you do that, it's so embedded into your normal process that it's not even a topic, whether you invest or not into your analytics team or into certain technology. It's completely embedded into the way you're doing HR. And that, I think, that's the way we approach it in PepsiCo, and that's, I think, what helped us to really make an impact on how we were working.
Yeah, I saw a lot of nodding heads from your fellow panelists while you're talking about that. Do you want to jump in on that, Melissa, Nikki, Beatriz? I saw a lot of nodding heads. Yes, that's how we need to do it.
I think from kind of a strategic workforce planning perspective and making sure you have the right shape and size and skill set of an organization, we constantly struggle with this kind of chicken and egg thing. You know, on one camp it's, well, what's the business strategy today and what do we think it's going to be tomorrow? And how can we make sure we have the right workforce in place, mix capabilities, et cetera, to achieve that business strategy that's coming tomorrow? But then the flip side of it is you should be able to understand what your current workforce shape, size, mix is and what that workforce can be used to help you achieve tomorrow. So it's balancing, you know, how much of, from a strategic workforce planning perspective, should you help feed into the overall longer term business strategy, and how much of that strategy should you consume to help develop your long-term strategic workforce plan. So in my mind, it's very cyclical and very feedback driven. I think you have to look at it from both angles.
Mm-hmm. A big focus right now is around employee well-being. In fact, we did a survey recently amongst all of the CHROs in our 140,000 people we sent it out to in our database, and overwhelmingly the number one priority amongst our community was employee well-being, which wasn't a surprise whatsoever. Nikki, I know you've done some work in this area. I was wondering how has data helped you make better informed decisions to prioritize employee well-being in the organization?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple of things. Actually, I was going to briefly comment on Melissa's last point as well on workforce planning, because I think one of the really important things at the moment is when you're putting people first and thinking about, you know, delivering on your business objectives in very changing times and, you know, responding to changing customer needs, changing consumer needs, you need to deploy at speed. So you need to really understand your workforce, really understand your talent to know, can somebody move from you know, very tangible physical kind of marketing to e-commerce, or, you know, actually, and being able to retrain at speed, redeploy at speed, and allocate people to where they can have the most value. So I was just supporting Melissa's point. That's something we've found, you know, workforce planning before may have been more about, you know, churn, restructuring, and all the other things that people talk about in workforce planning. But actually, it's about leveraging the wonderful talent that you have to the best possible work and supporting them with the training they need to do that. So I think that's something that we found extremely valuable, particularly in the last 6 months. But to answer your question, Chris, about well-being, there was one particular point I was reflecting on that's been important to us in understanding employee voice, because I'm sure, as everybody has been, we've been doing a lot of town halls, making sure our CEO, our local leaders are all talking very, very regularly to our employees and our workers across the organization. So they're clear about what we're doing, how our strategy is evolving, and their role within that. And as part of those, I'm sure, again, everyone else on the call has been using tools where you get employee questions, often anonymously. And it's obviously really good to get feedback, because, you know, feedback is a gift. But what you'll get on those town halls is what I would call a very vocal minority. And if your vocal minority is representative of the entire workforce, that is brilliant, because that's what everyone's hearing. That's the feedback to the leaders, and that really helps. But it's so important to check that your vocal minority is representative of your silent majority. And actually having that always on feedback approach is incredibly important. Asking the questions of the things that are really important to you, that your people feel supported by their line leaders, that they feel that they are well at home and able to work, and balancing all the different changing priorities. As Melissa was saying, you know, we know that people have got changing rules all the time. We've had people being able to have children cared for at school with elderly parents, and everything changing all the time. And, you know, having a very deliberate policy of putting people first. So you care for yourself, you care for your family, and then you work. Making sure that people really feel and can live that message, and check that through this always on sentiment point of view has been a really important way of understanding our workforce, particularly, as I was saying earlier, for people who've join the organization during this crisis, because what they haven't had is the ability to understand and learn the culture such that they understand that we really mean what we say. So I think actually constantly checking and understanding whether, you know, what we say we're going to do and what people feel and respond to is the same. So that's been really important for us.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to that, Nikki. I really saw also in one example, one very specific example, in one country in our group, where before we introduced this listening approach, there were already these topics on the table. You know, global flex policy, work from home policies. I mean, I'm talking about 2 years back, so COVID was not there yet. So, but still, these discussions were there, and the action taking was not really there. And what we saw when we introduced this more statistically significant, coming back to minorities versus what does the actual group says and who actually says it in terms of segmentation, versus I've got my lieutenant who tells me every day this is good or this is bad, or some people who I connect to. Even, you know, the leaders very often connect with people who they smoke a cigarette outside the building, and that's where they get some information from, which is great, but it's not statistically really representing the group. And what we found introduced in this specific example is that they actually launched the work from home policy at that moment. And it's not because it was a new discovery they found for this process. What they actually did, they actually gave them the confidence that this investment was the right one and would actually satisfy engagement-wise and productivity-wise, would yield benefits. And this is really expected. So I think it's creating the confidence also. This data-driven approach creates the confidence for leaders to move more easily to action, while before they might have been questioning a lot whether that's the right thing to do or not.
Beatriz, I'd love to get your thoughts and perspectives on this and what you're doing at Baker Hughes.
So when you really look at, for us, it's very important to really understand the sort of aspirational correlation between talent management data, human capital data, with actually business results. So I think when you think about what is the strategic game changer for HR, for me, is that question about the return on investment of talent management data and analytics. Because David was mentioning, right? So you can fall in love very easily with a lot of insights. And some of those insights are static. By the time that you look at them, they are already in the past. So how do we really look at that is something that we are very focused at Baker Hughes, and specifically to help managers to understand particularly two dynamics. One is performance. One of the big questions is how are we going to manage performance, and how performance is going to be impacted in the way that it's being managed now that everybody has gone remote. So not particularly on the what, because you were mentioning in the previous postcard, in the previous session, actually, Chris, that what matters is the outcome, but it's more around the how of performance and how do we provide those insights to leaders that are real time and that actually can act upon to actually manage that performance, that how of performance moving forward, and how do you use predictive analytics to actually send insights to managers for a continuous coaching. So those are the invisible things that I was mentioning that managers in the remote world have lost, and they're actually craving, and they're coming back to us saying, hey, look, I know what the person is producing, but I keep hearing that the leadership behaviors are actually not there, but I cannot see that. How is there any data that actually can help me to understand that? So that's one. And the other piece that is important is how do we move from static analytics that we provide to managers and that have been here for a long time to actually real-time analytics around the team's collaboration and the team's connectivity, how they're doing, are they being effective, are they actually connected with the right people? So some of those organizational networks systems that we are exploring, with all the challenges that we have around GDPR and data privacy, but it's all aimed to actually help managers to facilitate in this remote world better connectivity and connections of their teams so that they can be more productive, and therefore they can, in theory, have better business results. So it's that whole chain about the return on the investment and the ability to correlate those human data capital to actually business outcomes is where I personally think, and we are very focused on understanding that as a strategic game changer for HR analytics, actually.
They also jump in on there. I'd be interested to know, as we become more data driven, and I'll ask this to yourself, David, how do you see the profession of HR changing over the next few years as we become increasingly more data driven?
I don't know if it's necessarily going to change because of that. I think I think fundamentally the profession has changed quite significantly. We moved, from a relatively soft skill driven kind of function where we were valuing a lot, those kind of capability, which there is nothing wrong with that. I think what you observe in general and beyond data and beyond analytics is that you have more and more people with a quite strong business background that are entering into HR. And the reason for that is that, again, because sometimes some organization, they had almost a parallel agenda between the talent and the HR agenda and the business agenda. I think now most organizations, they have something way more holistic and integrated. And as a result, the role of HR has changed quite significantly. The other thing is that HR has been now very much involved also in the design of future capability, future fit for purpose organization, and those kind of things, which de facto calls also very different kind of capability, where indeed analytics plays now a very important role in those space. So yeah, definitely you see an evolution in that direction. I'm not sure it's necessarily driven by analytics per se. I think it's more the outcome of what the business expects, the role that the business expects HR to play. And again, I see analytics and data in that space as an enabler, to achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Is that something you agree with, Nikki? I can see you nodding away there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say HR hasn't become more data driven. Business has become more data driven. And actually, we have an important role to play in business, and we need to make sure that we are going on the same journey. And really it's augmenting decision making. So I think what we'll find is you won't find people that can't do data anymore. I can remember from 20 years ago seeing people with a PowerPoint table adding up numbers with a calculator on their phone. You're not going to be having that anymore. People understand the basics. The way people access and use data has changed so much. And I think, our responsibility leading people analytics is making sure that the tools are absolutely easy to use, that you get the right insights, the right understanding, and that you don't need a whole narrative and a sea of footnotes in order to actually understand what you're reading. That actually you can make quick decisions because you've got the right information at your fingertips to make the decision. So, I often talk in my team about raising capability of our entire function is as much what we do, as well as having all the new cool tools, all of the really creative, hypothesis testing and insights. It is about raising the ceiling on what we can do, pushing the boundaries, but it is also about raising the floor, really bringing up the capability of the whole function so we can all engage in a proper business data-driven conversation in a more augmented way. The only other piece I was going to quickly add is we must keep coming back to the importance of ethics, the importance of data protection, because actually, as we access and use data more and more, the importance of understanding your local labour law, your local agreements, things you have in place with your works councils, with your unions, being incredibly respectful of the trust that's been placed in you with the data that you have. Often you have to be the important custodian of that, and making sure you've got the right governance and support in place to play this, in role we've been invited to. So that's the only other thing we haven't touched on, Chris. I just wanted to mention.
Just to react, Nikki, on what you just say on augmenting, I think it's a very important thing, which I think we need sometimes to demystify, what analytic is, because a lot of people sometimes think that it's this magic box that suddenly is going to do the job for you, and take all the decision. So first of all, let's remind that a lot of algorithms, basically, they are based on what you input. So if you input bias and, wrong data or, wrong input, it will lead to the wrong decision. So let's be very clear also that it's not a magical thing that suddenly comes out of nowhere. That's one. And what you say about augmenting is very important. What I keep reminding my teams is the fact that at the end of the day, this is an additional data point that will inform you about a certain number of options, but your judgment is still has still a role to play into that. We're not going to be, behind a machine and just waiting for the answer to be provided. You still have to apply judgment. And this is what I think it's very important sometimes to clarify, because people get confused and feel that this analytic component is going to take away a lot of decision and radically change, the way we're doing things. It will to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, again, it's more an augmentation of already capability you have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think we like to use the terms, data-informed decision-making. You get as many data points as you possibly can get, and that will help go into your decision-making process. So I fully agree there. And Chris, just to build on your question around, the future of HR roles, and I think when we talk about becoming more data-driven or data-informed within HR, for me, it's about, and I fully support Nikki as well, it's about upskilling the entire function and raising the bar to be what I would consider consumers of good quality people-related information and analytics. I wouldn't necessarily expect the entire HR function to become analytics gurus out there crunching algorithms all day long. That's for the data geeks to do in my team. We love it. But I would expect all HR folks to slowly mature and grow and be the best consumers of that information, to understand what it means and to understand what they can take to the business strategy discussions and business leader discussions with that people information to help make better decisions. And so for me, it's all about becoming active consumers of information.
There is linking with that, Melissa. I think a role of HR when you look at a bit better that data coach. So typically we just have those analytics, we send the analytics, HR sends analytics to the managers, and sort of the managers then in most cases they just don't know sometimes how to look at it, what insights and to do. So I think that when you really look at what the role of HR is evolving, part of it is to become more data driven for sure, but that has been here for the last 7 years, is more around how do you become a better data coach. We're very good at coaching behaviors. Are we good at sort of coaching with data and understanding what that data in the context of that manager ecosystem looks like, and how we can help them translate those data into insights and then take an action, and then how they bring impact in the business or in the company. So that role of HR still has not matured, but has enough, and I think that the next future it looks really, really promising on that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to Jan's earlier point in the conversation about putting the data in the hands of the managers as well, and not making a HR or a people analytics. Putting the data in the hands of our leaders and our managers in a way that they can have the insights they need when they need it, and they can make decisions quickly, informed decisions quickly as well. I'm being told off by my producer as always about time. But before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice you could give to everyone, or just everyone listening, and in terms of what we've discussed so far, what would that be? We'll start with yourself, Beatriz.
I would say the advice on analytics is sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially for HR leaders that perhaps are not really kind of are still in the journey of acquiring that analytical piece. I think that the understanding is really to kind of look at those analytics with the lenses of what are the connectivities that data is bringing into your day-to-day, versus looking at just the analytic in itself. So what can you do to actually bring that and translate that into the correlation of impact, and how actually can managers help you as well be a better HR by helping them to use that data in a different way. So that's probably what I would say to all the HR leaders around.
Fantastic. Jan?
Yeah, what I took out over the last 2 years, I think, is and it's because of our own journey, but I think it's a pretty fundamental shift, is to really move from hard data to more behavioral data. I mean, more and more sources of data are opened up, more and more need for understanding actual behaviors of people, as opposed to how many people you have in a certain organization, or segment them by demographic data. So I think the behavioral data aspect from our end has really accelerated our credibility to gather that data and to promote that data and to get into the hands of the business, was really an accelerator to setting up the need for people analytics. So as I said, we started the other way around. We created people analytics and we got the funding because we showed that we were able to bring in this behavioral data, which was basically missing in the first end. And I think it's going to go even further in the future for all kinds of ONA analysis, as I mentioned earlier. And I think this is a thing to consider when you embark on the journey. How much of the data do you have, and what is the kind of what you want to implement to get that data for better decision making?
Fantastic. Melissa?
I think my advice would definitely be to keep it simple. I think a lot of times we create all these wonderful HR measures and we come up with 50 pages of 2,000 numbers and we expect people to understand and consume them. I think it's about really identifying those few bits of information that resonate with the business and can be tied directly to helping us achieve our business strategies, and going very deep on those few measures and making sure that everyone can understand and internalize them properly.
Fantastic. I knew that was coming from you, Melissa.
Always.
Consistent advice, and it's great advice. Nikki?
I've got the really big one for me is don't be bamboozled by terminology. So people will talk to you about algorithms, AI, ML, and I enjoy it in my role because I can really challenge them. What do you mean by an algorithm? What are you actually doing with the data? And it really comes down to a very basic formula. But actually, don't be bamboozled by that, because all they're talking about is using data to help support your judgment. And I would definitely recommend a book by Hannah Fry called Hello World, because for me, it just helps demystify a lot of the things about analytics and helps make it very accessible. So that would be my one recommendation.
Fantastic. I feel like we're missing someone, right? Or is that everyone? Is that everyone?
Me, I can say one thing.
Yeah, I feel like we're missing someone. Yeah, David.
Look, I think we've said already a lot. The thing I would say, you remember, maybe I'm old, but you remember a few years back when we had cars with just a wheel and, a stick, and that's it, basically, and you were going from A to B. And look at now. Now you have all sorts of information coming through, and your GPS, you have application to help you to navigate. For me, that's exactly what data analytics, talent analytics, and people analytics are. It's just, at the end of the day, you're still driving from A to B. But you're going to have now a lot of information that will ease the experience and help you to manage the emotion and a certain number of challenging situations that you may meet while you drive. It's exactly the same thing.